then Sheriff Scott Israel. It was very exciting. Right after Governor Ron DeSantis spoke, I had the great pleasure of meeting a very special man who you're going to meet in just a moment. He told me a little about why he was there. We talked a little about emergency management, and he spoke in such a captivating and clearly communicative way that even in my mind, which was hyperactive at that moment, I was able to absorb it, and I immediately asked him to speak. Tonight he is speaking. In addition to being an emergency management instructor and whatever else, and he can tell you more about that than I can, he also is a historian. He's chosen tonight to speak about history in World War I and Central Eastern Europe, and he's also going to tell us a little bit about how that has impacted what we experienced through future wars and coming down to today. So give him your ears, give him your hands, George Navarini.
Good evening, everybody. Let me ask you, can you hear me without this?
Yes.
Good. Because I have a tendency of moving around a lot. I teach college to a lot of millennials. Kristen, you know what that's all about? If you cannot capture their attention, it's going to be a very interesting couple of hours. But not worry, I'm not going to talk to you for a couple hours. When I spoke to Ruth the other day about what we're going to discuss this evening, we actually chatted for a while, and yes, we talked a little bit about history, and hopefully I'll get to it. But a lot of things have happened in the last couple of days. So I'm not going to be long-winded, but I may cover several things. And if I do not cover the history we talked about, hopefully you'll invite me again.
The floor is yours.
Thank you. Let me ask you all, how did you all enjoy watching the storm brewing for the last several days? And nothing happening other than that feeling of impending dread.
Yep.
And nothing happens, but we're watching what's coming. And you all think I'm talking about Dorian. But for the last 3 years, and actually for the last 3 decades, if not more, we have been watching an impending storm.
Mm-hmm.
Just offshore, impending doom, our way of life changing. And in some respects, we may think that storm resides in that swamp we call Washington, D.C. But the storm is a lot further and a lot wider than we imagined. But I'm not here to bring you down. On the contrary, I'm here to bring you up. By the way, I like your boots. I almost wore mine, but I drive a stick, and it's really hard to change gears with the boots. But anyhow, in a nutshell, and the boots distracted me. Now I'm going to cover a couple of things. I'm going to go back and forth a little bit, but hopefully you will understand how it all ties together in the end. Our situation in our country goes back, our fundamental change in our country goes back a little over 100 years. But whether if we look at our history 100 years ago or in the here and now, our founders would have not recognized what we have.
No.
If you go back and think, 56 men got together in Philadelphia and planned a revolution. And a couple of decades later, after winning a war and securing a peace, they put together a form of government that did not quite work. So many of the same men and several more or less about 5 dozen, got together and created another revolution. And by the way, what they did at that point in time, in some respects, could be considered illegal. because they were plotting to change the government. And what came out is what today we refer to as the Constitution of the United States. And what is interesting about the Constitution, and you remember a former president talking about that it was a collection of negative rights, and he was absolutely right, one of the few times he was in his 8 years occupying the White House, because it basically said what the government cannot do to us. Now hold that thought in your mind. The Constitution was not designed to make a large monolithic state. The government that the framers had in mind was to be small, local, and temporary. Does that describe the government we have today? Well, there starts part of our problem. Huge part of our problem. One of the things that's interesting in a federal republic is that at the end of the day, the power remains with the people. Good men and women that work every day with bread on the table, feed their families, and make their children have a life better than they did, unencumbered by the state. Unencumbered by the 3,000-mile screwdriver emanating from D.C. However, one of the things that is interesting in a federal republic, because it is designed to be small, transparent, and temporary, for some people it does not work well for handling emergencies of the here and now. And we see that very often in situations of emergency management. Because when something goes on, like it did in 1864, 1865, or in 1929, or in 1941, or in 2008, we have a tendency to revert to our worst 16-year-old. And we expect mom and dad to take care of us. And I don't mean this as us in this room, but us as a society. Because something is bigger and nastier than what we can imagine. And if you look back at each of those folds in our history, that opened a door for whoever was the chief executive to be able to amplify and extend the power of a centralized government. The one that has affected us the most actually goes back to 1929. So yes, we are talking a little bit of history. Where we had the beginnings of the Great Depression. Now, what is interesting in many respects, we've had similar economic situations before in our past, and the government largely ignored it. And if you go throughout our history, you will find the panic of in a year. And that's usually the impact that it occurred. Because the federal government took the role that the framers designed and stepped back and allowed free market economics to fix things. And yes, there was some crying and gnashing of teeth, but things got fixed in about 8 to 9 months to a year. Some people lost, the country as a whole gained. Unfortunately, in 1928, 1929, we went in a slightly different direction. By 1932, we had a totally different government, and we've been wearing that ever since. And if you watch basically what happened to the United States, particularly at the federal level, during the 15 or so years, 16 years, actually, let's call it 20 years, of the Roosevelt and Truman administration, we have created the administrative state that the framers would never recognize. And that now puts us in a position to have a government that is totally and completely different than what is illustrated in the Constitution. And that is basically the map that we are playing on. That is the roadmap as designed, but not the premise as written. As Republicans, as conservatives, as constitutional, one of you, I think the gentleman left, constitutional conservatives realize that we want to go back to what is written. Unfortunately, you cannot wind time back. We have to play the cards that are dealt with us. And that brings us to two parts, and I will go in two directions at this point. It will come back together at the end. When you have an administrative state like we have today, that creates a tremendous amount of work. People can make a career leeching off any little tendril of the administrative state. We all live here on the coast. Everybody here know what a remora is?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, it's that little fish that doesn't hunt. It's that little fish that really doesn't swim much. It sticks itself to a shark.
Mm-hmm.
When the shark eats, the remora eats. And if we look around the area, around the Washington, D.C. area, Laura, you've run into this before, you have a vast collection, a vast aquarium of remoras,
Mm-hmm.
all eating well in and around the sharks. There are two species of remoras in Washington, D.C. We don't like to admit that, but there are. There is the blue remora, and there is the red remora. And you know what? They don't care what shark they stick on. They are going to eat well wherever there are scraps. So when you have someone that comes in and says, we have too many sharks in the aquarium, we're going to bring in some dolphin. Do you think the remoras are going to be happy?
No.
Do you think the red remoras are going to be any different than the blue remoras? You now have a very simple description of the deep state. And I think you can figure out who suddenly came in and wants to change the sharks to dolphins. He's our current president. Because he realizes that in any sea that has too many sharks, it gets messy at the end. So that brings us in a very simple term to what we run into. But the deep state relies on a certain degree of stability. Things are supposed to work as they're supposed to work. When there is a disruptor, the disruptor needs to be eliminated. Which brings us to 2016, where we had the most unusual situation in U.S. history. We had the combination, or the culmination, of a candidate that everyone expected and nobody liked, and a candidate that no one understood and no one believed could win. And I'm sure all of you in this room have gone on YouTube numerous times. I do it at least once a week. There's around a 6-minute video that has all of the newscasters crying and gnashing their teeth, and I mean real tears and real screams as the world as they knew it came to an end. But as all of you are familiar with the several stages of grief, one of the early ones is denial. And it's usually followed by anger. And that kind of describes the news cycle for about the last 2 years. We haven't gotten to acceptance yet. But here I think is where it's going to become interesting. The fun is just beginning. The fun is just beginning. There are going to be 2 explosions coming in the near future. And if it comes to pass, you'll remember me. It's the old guy with the beard and lack of hair. I told you about it here. If it doesn't come to pass, you can just, that guy that came from South Broward, he was fine. Let's see how it plays out. If y'all remember my name, it came to pass. The pendulum is about to swing in the other direction. Attorney General Barr and his staff have been doing a lot of investigating. They're connecting a lot of dots. And the dots are forming lines. And those lines are pointing in a direction that the Remoras are not happy with. And we've seen the distractions, Russia, collusion. Now they brought back Stormy Daniels. There are grasps of desperation. Has anybody here ever studied to be a lifeguard? Okay, I've got a couple of hands. So if you remember in training, one of the most dangerous things you have when you are a lifeguard is, do you know how most lifeguards drown?
The drowning person.
By the person they're trying to save.
Yes.
Because that person gets desperate. And as we watch Congressman Schiff, and we watch Congressman Nadler, and Mad Max Waters, and the rest of that coddling, the chattering masses that we have seen in D.C., put out weirder and weirder stuff. And keep in mind, in the next couple of days, they're going to be in full bloom. So we're going to get a lot of entertainment that way. And the crazier it gets, and the more desperation we hear, that should tell you we are getting close to bang. So all of this noise that we're hearing is all left of bang. The fun becomes right of bang. I have the suspicion that we will see indictments coming very soon. When the indictments come, we will start seeing people singing. Those of you who remember the name Joseph Alachi, all right, we're going to get this one. Actually, that was back then. We got those in 45s. Now we can do this and live stream it. That's explosion 1. Explosion 2 is the clown car our friends from the other side of the aisle have put together. Of the 28, 29, I think a few have dropped out. The number keeps changing, including 1 or 2 that live down in my end of Broward County, which couldn't even get enough horsepower to be on this stage. Let's call it 20 for argument's sake, more or less. About 19 of them want to turn the United States into Venezuela.
Mm-hmm.
That the laws apply for 3 groups of people. Those of us in charge, the workers, which is us, and those who want to come in and steal our food. And like you, sir, as a parent of immigrants, both of my parents are from Buenos Aires. I think we have a grasp of what immigration is and what illegal immigration is, and it's 2 different things. That everything can be free because there is money, except there's not. And we have to change our Constitution if we can save 1 child's life, but it's all right to kill children. It just depends where they happen to live at the time. If they happen to be in the womb, have at it. If they happen to be just born in the state of New York, have at it. The same repugnancy that you are showing in your faces as I describe this actually manifests across the country, even with our friends, many of our friends across the aisle. In short, with the exception of 1 person, the entire cast of candidates that they have brought before us do not reflect the views of any part of the United States other than a small group of their minions. For those of you who remember the election of 1972, George McGovern, we're going in the same direction. There is only 1 person who seems to be nominally centrist. He also seems to be nominally senile. So basically what we are seeing is that if they take from the group that they have assembled thus far, they're not going to present a candidate that makes a lick of sense. The only outlier on this is if they bring in someone from the outside who will not be subjected to the whims of a primary, but has enough name recognition that will not have to go through that process and can be nominated from the floor of a normally corrupt Democratic National Convention and suddenly becomes the new name at the table. So keep in mind, if you start seeing in the next couple of weeks and months, more and more really, really good talk about Michelle Obama.
Yeah.
But that can be the interesting turn that we're going to get. However, even saying that, it is still a flawed candidate.
Oh, yeah.
And it's not because we're saying it as Republicans, it's because history tells us it is. However, all of that I painted does not mean that we have to get comfortable, that this one's in the bag. We can stay at home because they will fight us tooth and nail. And we talked about this at the macro level, at the national level. But as Tip O'Neill used to tell us, all politics are local. And at the end of the day, if we look at what affects each and every one of us on a day-to-day basis, it is not the machinations of Lois Frankel or my congressperson, Debbie Wasserman Schultz. I now have to take a cleansing bath. And I can tell you a funny story about Debbie and me. I can tell you several, actually. I'll tell you two. When she was state representative, she ran me off the road on the turnpike because she was yakking away on the phone and drove my car off the road, and I could see on the back of the car it said Florida Legislature 97, which ironically now is District 104, now we'll be running that district. Running in the People's Republic of Rhode as a Republican. The other one is that Debbie has to see me 2 times a year.
104.
As she is a member of Congress, and I happen to be the representative for the U.S. Coast Guard Academy. So every time they have to do a Congressional Academy Day event, Debbie Wasserman has to be nice to me. You can see the revulsion in her face. You kind of know that she's got to swallow some water because she's getting acid reflux when she has to talk. It's great fun. I go out of my way to see her 2 or 3 times every event. But getting back to the point, it is not what Maxine Waters or Nancy Pelosi or Chuck Schumer or Wasserman Schultz or Frankel does up in D.C. that affects our everyday lives. It's the stuff that our sheriff would be doing. It is the stuff that our state representatives will be doing. It is the stuff that our county commissioners and our town councils are doing. And this is where we kind of drop the ball as Republicans. We have a tendency of looking at the prize. And most times, and no offense to the 3 people who are in the room this evening, we have a tendency that when we're going to take the first bite out of the apple, hey, we're going to run for Congress. We've taken a tour of the White House, or taken a tour of the Capitol, so we kind of qualify. And again, no disrespect to you all. As Republicans, we kind of eschew running for town council, for city commission, for county commission, for dog catching. Because those are, the Democrats don't. The Democrats will have a 4-way primary for assistant dog catcher of Podunk County.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they will.
And we don't even run a person, so it really doesn't matter. It's going to be one of the D's holding the job. They will build a bench, they will build name recognition, and they end up in Congress. They end up at the State House. They end up in the State Senate because they build a bench in that manner. And this is where we need to improve. And that's why I like to talk to Republican clubs around Florida about this very district, about this situation. We have to start building our bench because the other side is doing it. Let me give you a brief glimpse of one of the three Democrat candidates that I will be facing in District 104. One of them, the gentleman's name is, if I can remember it correctly, Ikhtiar Mohammed. What? Inataz Mohammed. Thank you, ma'am. Yes, whatever you call it. You can tell a nice Irish man. What is
Imitaz Mohammed.
Imitaz.
Yeah.
I just lock on the Mohammed part. Imitaz has been in our country for about 10 years. He is a U.S. citizen for a grand total of 5. This is his second run as state representative. He ran in 2018 in District 97, which is Coral Springs. The day after the election, he filed to run for State House 104, which is Weston, Southwest Ranches, Western Pembroke Pines. I keep mentioning the cities because Mr. Mohammed doesn't even live in any of them. He lives in Miramar. In his own literature, in his own words, he says that he is interested in running to represent the Muslims of Florida. And my problem with that is not that he is running to represent the Muslims of Florida. Because if the gentleman is a Muslim, I don't care, and neither should you. Because it is his faith, and whether we like it or not, it is his faith, it is his business. And if we are true defenders of liberty, when we start denying the liberty of one of us, we start denying the liberty of all of us.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe that is because I also went to Florida, probably a year or two before you did, and I was the only papist in the room. Okay, that's it for those of you who may not know, that's what they call Catholics in places where you weren't the majority. And being a son of immigrants, I was told I could not do things because I was not a real American. Bullshit, I was born here, same as the rest of y'all. When we deny the rights of one, we deny the rights of all of us. It's just a matter of time. It just becomes incremental. My problem is that this gentleman is running to represent only one part of our great Floridian community and is not interested in representing his district because he doesn't even live in his district. Enough about Imitaz. Thank you.
Yeah.
Another gentleman, Maury Wright. Maury is a resident of Weston for approximately a year and a half. He is a transplant from Washington, D.C., and I have my investigative reporter checking this out. Thank you, ma'am. I've never been fact-checked while I was talking before. I love it.
I'm not fact-checking you. I just would like to, I'll save it for the Q&A, but I disagree in that he should have an equal right to run because there's a difference between running in this country to represent American citizens, and there's another difference between being a jihadist affiliated with the Council on American Islamic Relations, like Imitaz Mohammed is. And the reason why he's running in Florida is because the largest branch of CARE is located in Florida. And I don't know if a lot of you know this, but today, CARE was successful in challenging the United States government on the constitutionality of the terror watch list. So the United States terror watch list is going to be eradicated now because of CARE, who Imitaz is backed by.
Yes.
And when he gets elected, right, he's not going to take his oath on a Bible or the Constitution.
Yeah,
He's going to
he's not going to get elected.
Well, if he does, right? People said the same about Ilhan Omar, but now we have 2 jihadists serving in Congress.
And the interesting thing, thank you, ma'am, there's actually over 20,000 that are running for all different positions.
Yeah.
Every last one of them as a Democrat. Okay. My problem is not their faith. My problem is their ideology. And it is totally different. And that kind of filters back to what you were saying. Let me talk about the other gentleman. Again, fact check me if you will.
No, I was just...
You probably know him. Yeah. Maury Wright. Hold the clock.
George, I can give you 5 more minutes.
Okay, no problem. Okay, thank God it was my time. I thought it was Maury's been with us under 3 years. Since in the keep it nice and short. He comes to us from Washington, D.C. as a Justice Democrat. So I expect that there will probably be a fair amount of out-of-state money supporting him. The third individual is Robin Bartlett. If the name is familiar, she was one of the lead clowns in the clown car called the Broward County School Board. And did I say anything else?
No.
Left to its devices, one of those three would be the next state representative for Southwest Broward County. Unless we have a Republican step up, and that's what I'm going to be doing. I give you my example as an example, but we should be doing more of this. I should be primary. I know that sounds weird. It means I spend more money, but I should be primary because it means that there is another ambitious Republican that may have even better ideas in mind. And the one who has the better ideas then moves forward to defend our community. But we cannot just sit there and pick and choose, but we have to take this with the same aggressiveness and long-term view as our opponents across the aisle are doing. And let me leave you with a final thought. That should cover about the 3 minutes I have. My first election was 1976, back in the Jurassic era. It was really nice. Some of you guys probably remember we would get these clay tablets and we would in cuneiform.
Cuneiform, yeah.
That we were voting. Just about. Absolutely. Miami-Dade County at the time was not only blue, it was beyond blue.
Maybe.
Those of you who also sport gray hair probably remember the old voting machines we had back then with the levers. Little box.
Mm-hmm.
You go in and you close the curtain behind you.
Mm-hmm.
A light would turn on, and the thing was running. You would pull down the levers of the people that you're voting. When you were satisfied, it was kind of like being in Vegas. You pull down a handle, it's going no.
If you're a Democrat, it would.
As soon as you would do that, the light would turn off, the thing would open all by itself, and you got the lever. Rather complex little animal. When I go to my precinct, Hialeah Miami Lakes Senior High School, just built 3 years prior, I walk in with my shiny new voter's registration card, ink still wet on it, and I present it to a very bored gentleman. I hand it to him, and he looks at it, and he crunches up his faces and says, "Oh, you're one of those."
Yeah.
The room had 25 of those voting machines. 24 were on one side of the room with lines on each one of them. On the other side, there was one machine with dust on it.
Yes.
That was my machine. I was in and out in 4 minutes. Got to vote for Gerald Ford. That kind of gives you the idea of what Dade County was back in 1976. It was the same era where you had a tremendous man, Barry Goldwater, tremendous conservative, that won a grand total of 8 states back in 1964. And the Democrats, according to Lyndon Johnson and several components of the Democratic Party, would be voting for the next 500 years. So we were going to be the permanent minority party in this country. By 1984, Miami-Dade County was almost 78% red. And as a few of my Cuban friends would tell me, George, there's only two parties, the Republican Party and the Communist Party. And you know what? Back in 1984, he was spot on right. And they're still communists today. And the reason I tell you this story is because I like to talk about myself. No. The reason I tell you this story are twofold. First of all, the concept that we can be D plus 19, or in my district with Wasserman Schultz, D plus 32, does not mean it will stay that way. Those who will make a difference are us. We have to take the ball and run with it.